Hello and welcome to Beyond Perception podcast, The Hyperfocus, a new and innovative show designed to provide support for everyone and anyone who is interested in supporting those with neurodiversity or those themselves who wish they could have greater support in their environments. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave your comments below and your questions because we want to interact with you as much as possible. I'd like to welcome Emma onto the show. Emma Biggin is a trainee sports psychologist, owner of the Big Sports Psych, where Emma regularly updates blogs to support her followers with the latest sports psychology. Emma, thanks for coming on board again.
Thanks for having me back.
It's all right. How have we been since the last time we recorded? All good?
Yeah, not too bad. Yourself?
Yeah, not so bad. As people probably can see, I've had a nice new haircut. It's taken at least 10 days off myself, so feeling good with that. Let's get straight into the show. So in today's episode, we're going to be discussing learning and the ways in which neurodiversity can affect those learning moments in the environment, both positively and negatively. And when we talk about learning today, we're going to be talking around the short-term learning, so the immediate moments, and those might be known as things like recall and retrieval practice, but what we really want to delve into is how do we support those in our session, and how as coaches can we make sure that we can get the information across to our athletes and that we know that we're providing it in the best possible way so that everyone can learn from it and the speed of the session can flow. So with that said, Emma, with your experience and you working with your athletes, what would be your take on the understanding around learning within the sporting environment?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of challenges around kind of learning in the sporting environment. Definitely from the athletes that I've worked with, it does seem to be a common theme that comes up. Obviously, as we said in the first episode, and we're going to probably continue to say, in all of them, everyone's different. So it's not that absolutely everyone's going to struggle in these situations or that people will struggle in the same way within them. But it definitely seems to be a common theme. So things that can be difficult, let's say just before a drill, a coach is stood there trying to explain what's going to be happening, perhaps explaining a new formation that the team's going to be practicing, and there can be a lot of information in a very short period of time, and we're not very good, just as humans, at being concise with what we talk about. And you'll probably notice that from our podcasts, where we probably go completely off track and it's like trying to pull the information from it, but we are terrible at it. So there's a lot of information there. A lot of it actually is irrelevant. There's like key snippets that we actually want athletes to go away and take from it to actually help them and to learn from. Now, that can be a really challenging situation for neurodiverse individuals. A lot of the time there are memory retention, processing challenges that neurodiverse people will have. So typically the processing time for information will be slower, especially if you're kind of block giving instructions. So it's like, okay, we're going to do this and then do this, and within that you've got to do this, and all of a sudden there's so many tasks in a small amount. And what you can often see is perhaps you've got an ADHD athlete that stood fidgeting about and you're thinking maybe they're not listening to me. Maybe there's an autistic athlete that stood there and they don't respond immediately, they don't go off to the drill immediately, and we're kind of reacting to it straight away.
Apologies, I've got a man at the door looking through my window.
I know, how inconvenient.
And that was going so well, and I heard him knock. I was like, I'm ignoring him, and then he just appeared at the window. I was like, sorry about that. Yeah, I should have invited him in, but right, where do we need to go from there? Because I'm aware that what you were saying was good. I don't want us to be. Do we go again, or do we have to? Can we edit that, Reece? Or do you think that'll make it difficult?
Yeah. What about going from maybe how neurodiverse people might kind of look in that situation? So when I was saying like an ADHD player might do this, autistic player might do that. Would that be a good reset point? Yeah. Or lost Greg. Oh, he's back.
What's the cat up as well, because he's not coming on this episode this time.
Cool. So in these situations, let's take, we've got an ADHD player that, we're trying to explain a drill, perhaps they're fidgeting a lot, perhaps they're still trying to play about with a ball or a bib, or there's a lot of movement going on, and we're thinking they're just not listening to what I'm trying to explain, what the instructions I'm giving. Perhaps we've got an autistic individual that at the end of explaining all of that kind of doesn't move off anywhere, takes that little bit of time, is really pausing before going, and we're thinking that perhaps they're not interested, they just don't want to do it. Perhaps we almost jump to an extreme, we go, well, just being lazy, why aren't they going to get started? Now, these can be a lot of misconceptions about what's actually going on, because an ADHD person that is fidgeting doesn't necessarily mean that they're not listening. And an autistic person, it takes a while afterwards to actually start to go and do something, they're probably still processing the task and actually almost trying to organise the information that you've given them in a bulk. So what can happen is, let's say one of these athletes doesn't quite understand what you've asked them to do, and they put a hand up and say, I don't get it, could you ask again? And our perception is, well, actually, you were moving about, you weren't looking at me, you were playing with this, you were doing that. We're going to automatically go on a defensive and be like, well, you just weren't listening. So basically tough. And all that's going to do is motivate that person to not ask questions moving forwards, not understand what's going on, because they get told off for just not listening, when actually, because of how the brain is functioning, it's just processing in a different way from what we're used to. And I think that's the really important aspect.
And just to jump in on that is what we would probably call stimming for those who may have an interest in what that is. So the stimming would be a form of sensory processing which allows someone to focus on an additional information. What people won't see as an example is when we are filming the podcast, my hands are off show, but I will play around with a wedding ring, or I will be having something in my hand, because it allows me to remain focused on the bigger task. And what you find with especially the ADHD side is that sometimes the players who are moving or stimming are doing it as a way to be able to keep that level of concentration. So I just thought it was a good little thing to add in, so people are aware of what it might be. And there's some really good artifacts online and in Instagrams and social medias where actually people are explaining what stimming is in a really nice one-page document, if people do want to go and look at it further. Just whilst you were going through that, you were talking about the ability to hold the information and how they process it. Emma, from your experience, what do we know around the actual ability to hold information? How much could we actually hold?
Yeah, so it's different across neurodiversities. So it's also obviously different across individuals within that. But if we take autism, for example, there's typically challenges around what we call social memory. So things like facial recognition, emotions associated, being able to recall their own experiences, that can be a really challenging area. Whereas they'll have typically more strengths in things like being able to remember rules or facts or routines. So things that are kind of more tangible, there'll be a stronger memory of, whereas things that are more kind of in that social nature, there will be less of. And the processing time, like I say, is typically slower. And also verbal processing can be really challenging. So we all do it. A lot of the things that we do, we talk to people, we expect them to just process language and kind of move on with it. And that can be a really difficult form of information processing for autistic individuals. For ADHD individuals, they typically have more challenges with what we call working memory. So that's kind of your short term, any information that's trying to be held. It's why, if you're walking around, you might misplace your keys, you might misplace your wallet, and it's because there's almost so much information going on, you can't hold on to it all at once. And that's going to be really important in terms of sport when a coach is trying to tell you lots of things to do, and we haven't got that capacity to necessarily hold and process all that information at once. And the other thing, a perspective, or is our perspective memory. So upcoming tasks, things like I've got to get to this social event, I've got to be at this training session, I've got something else I've got to attend. Typically, it's much harder to remember these upcoming tasks. Double book, be late for them, these types of things. And there's lots of things we can do to help support that. But it's also that recognition. It's not because people don't care. It's not like, oh, I'm not interested in it, and so I forgot that it's going on. It is a memory processing difference that means that trying to hold on to this information is much harder for these individuals.
Yeah, and to bring it into a coaching context, because there's a couple of things you've said there, and from like my experience coaching and from your experience working with people and coaching yourself, it's the understanding around how to make learning clear and obvious. So what I mean by that is that when we're trying to explain a task, a process, a game, we have to be aware that if we go on a big quest to explain what we're going to do, we lose the interest, and we also lose the ability for people to be able to recall and understand what it is we're trying to say. So one of the strategies we would use in our environment would be is that every time we're delivering a skill, or let's go with the skill as in this example. So we'll go make the 3 key processes as clear and as obvious to the players as we can, and we won't go above 3 because we know 3 is a strong number for the ability for people to hold the information and be able to recall it, retrieve it in another time. So the bit where we add on to that is that we want to make the learning, what I've learned to know, is as sticky. So when we're talking about making learning sticky, we're trying to make it so it becomes memorable. Now, some of the things we'll talk about on the podcast might have the irony, because we might not always be clear and obvious in our points, and we might not make learning exactly as sticky as we want. But the way I've tried to understand this is by, if we can create stories or imagery or bring the key piece of information to life in a way that it's just not verbal, it will also help increase the amount of recall that the athletes can go through. Have you had any of your athletes and clients come back with stories like that themselves, which maybe highlights what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, even in the sessions that I run, when I'm working, well, to be honest, across all my athletes that I work with, I always provide like summaries of the session, and I will adapt it. So I know I work with a particular athlete where I was kind of told ahead of time that if there's too much information, I just won't be able to process it all. So for that summary, it's just bullet points. These are the key things that we discussed, and here's the thing that I want you to practice. So that kind of visual cue, something to go away with that supports that verbal information, has been really, really useful, even in my practice. And the same as in coaching, there's, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, but there's a friend of mine who's a rugby coach, and he's fantastic at his job. And he was coaching a ladies team, and ahead of the season created this like booklet that went through all the different formations they would be covering, different skills that they would be looking at. And it just meant that people could look if they wanted to ahead of time, so they could have a basic knowledge and then kind of build on it in the sessions, but also after a session they could go back, have a look at it, and kind of cement that learning. Because in the moment there's so much going on, there could be a lot of stress going on. Coaches are sometimes not very good at kind of picking people out and being like, right, what was it, what did I say, what was this? And that causes a lot of stress, and that also will impact the learning. So having that resource to go back to afterwards and go, okay, this is what we covered, I can now kind of sit down and process it in the way that I need to process it, and actually I could go back and ask questions if I have them. I thought it was a great way of kind of addressing those challenges.
And it's a really good point you raise. So we're talking about learning, and as coaches we want to make sure our players have understood like what it is we've just explained to them or asked them to do. Now we know we can get them to demonstrate it, and that's a really good way of being able to see it. We know we can ask them to recall it, so that could be like the lists, it could be the key points, the processes. We might ask them to go into further detail. So when we're doing things like that, that's a great coaching tool for us to be able to learn what's being taken on board. But what I also want people to be aware of is that there are a couple of questions that don't help, and you mentioned it then within what you were saying. So the question of do you understand to a whole group is probably a really poor question, because those who are most likely going to struggle, and they might be some of our neurodiverse athletes, they might not be, but they're possibly not going to have the confidence to say, oh, I've got offline again. I'm back. Oh, right. I think where we got to. So, right. And I think you're right in what you're saying, and I think it's really important that we support our listeners in terms of the coaching side. So, when we're trying to check for understanding, it's really important we find ways in which we can support the learners and give them opportunities to showcase what their knowledge and their ability to retain is, without asking the bog standard question, do you understand? Because what we'll find is our least confident athletes are never going to say, I don't understand, can you repeat it? So that question can be a really dangerous moment within a session, because people are not going to be willing to say that they're not so sure. So it'd be really good if our coaches understand that we can get people to talk to partners and then recall lists. We can get them to go away and demonstrate it. We could get them to write it up at the end of a session, post-it note it on a wall. Depending on your environments, there's lots of ways where we can check for the understanding and check for learning. And what you then do is, like you talked about, when we can take the pressure away from some of our athletes, I think they will have a better opportunity to understand what that learning is and be able to show us it. And then what we can do is, if there are people who are still struggling, we can then support them additionally. So I think it's a really good point that you make. And I think it's a really nice way to check what we're doing within our sessions without just expecting everybody to understand it.
Yeah. And I think it cycles right back, doesn't it? Like, to that idea of, so we're not punishing people for not understanding. We should encourage people asking questions and being comfortable to do that, because there are people out there that will really struggle with these situations and feel that they can't even ask for clarity, but then they'll feel as if you're being set up for failure because they haven't understood what the coach has tried to say. If they put their hand up and ask, they get punished, but then when they don't do what they were asked to do, they also get punished. So when we're creating that environment where we can't just go, I'm really sorry, I don't get it. Could you try and explain it in a different way? Could you show a demonstration? Because my brain's really struggling with the verbal. Could you just demonstrate what it looks like? Because everyone learns in different ways. We've got auditory learners, we've got visual learners, we've got kinesthetic learners. You know what, that's something that could be useful for a coach to know before they even...
Emma, that's been disproved, that one, though, about the different learning styles. Yeah.
I didn't know that. Who knew?
Yeah, it actually has been disproved about the those three ways of learning. It's all... I think basically what they've come up with, like, it's not one or the other. It's a combination of all the different learning styles. It's more about what the other bits we've been talking about. So that's the only reason why I wanted to stop.
No, that's fine.
Because I know. Yeah. Sorry, I just thought so. We'll factor that one back.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think I got most of that. So where do you want to go from here, Emma? Sorry on that bit. Do you want to go? I was literally all on board until that bit. I felt like a bit of an arse. Sorry.
No, not at all. I appreciate it. What was a bit before that?
So we were on about. Go on, Reece. Uh, okay, so I'm just trying to think of best way to go. Let me just think of how I can redirect us into that right, because I can't think of where we got to the bit before where the break would be clean. You see. Completely lost train of thought here. I'm panicking now. I'm panicking now. No, no, but there's two reasons. One, I'm adamant it has been, and then the part of me goes, maybe I've said it out loud, and maybe I've now got it all completely wrong. And I'm like, I'm sure I've not. I'm sure that is right, but um, only because I think it is. Oh, this is where I get really baffled. Right, okay.
Because I
So
think
you
we were
said,
saying about
but I put my
the
hand up.
fact.
That's really bad. I was like this, going, can I stop? I don't want that in the bloody editing.
We can go because it was about the fact that we are going to put people off of asking questions. So being able to then maybe offer a different way of explaining that information. So I think
Yeah.
that's where we were up to. So maybe we can almost restage it.
Okay. And okay, that's fine. Um, yeah. So, no, why am I going to say yeah? That's fucking shite. It's interesting how you talk about the ways in which the learning can occur as well from your side of it, Emma. From our side on the coaching, we've actually been looking at how it's not just one of the learning styles or the way in which they learn. We've actually been working with some sports psychologists in the rugby environment where we've actually looked at how it's more of a combination of all of those. There's not one particular type. So when we're producing information for our players, and like again, going back to it being clear and obvious, making it sticky, it's around creating a visual with a clear set of words or the direct language so that we can put that to a player and that they can take all the information that they need from it. Now, sometimes it might mean that we have to take 10 minutes to do a presentation on one of our attacking principles. But then what we layer on with that is the visual of a logo, the key phrase, what will then be loaded on top of that. And what we then start to do is show them the picture, and that is then the ability for remind them of the information that comes with it. So we're almost combining the three different sorts of learning, but we're putting it into a practice where they can use all of the sensory learning moments in order to be able to recall.
Yeah. Yeah, which I think it makes complete sense. Like almost in a way you're producing more evidence, more information that the brain can process to build up that learning process. And that can look very different. Like you say, it could be verbal instructions matched with a written kind of written summary of it matched with a physical demonstration of it. If you've got that as a whole, you're going to probably process that information much more effectively than if you've just got someone talking to you in that moment. But yeah, being able to like have that and say, okay, I'm willing to try a different approach. I'm willing to, put these approaches together to make sure that everyone understands before setting people up essentially for that failure of, well, this is how I do it. It hasn't worked for you, and I'm sorry that I'm not changing. it's that being open to kind of adaptation in that situation.
Yeah, and that's the key tip we want people to take away from today's episode is to make learning sticky. We've got to make it in different ways, but make it really clear and obvious so that the people who are getting the information are not overloaded and bombarded. We understand that some will have visual representation which will really support the understanding of the information they've got. We might also be able to produce some visuals which might be through recordings, or it might be through like actual footage if we're in that environment, or it might be just through stories, creating a story which brings to life the key information. And again, I think if people can have a go of that, if our listeners have a go of that and let us know how they're finding it, what sort of things they've used to be effective, and then share that with us, I think that'll be outstanding. And I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the different ways that might have occurred. Look, really grateful of your time as always, Emma. Thank you very much for today's episode, and thank you to all our listeners, and we'll see you all in the next one. See you soon. Take care.